So we are here today to talk about resale price maintenance in the musical instrument industry and how the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, the CMA, went on a crusade around 2 or 3 years ago in order to make things right in the musical instruments sector. So the first point I would like to touch on today is what are the facts which led to the 5 cases against major players in the musical instruments field. Well, the CMA, so the Competition and Market Authority, which is the body in the United Kingdom in charge of enforcing competition law in the UK. So the CMA received quite a number of complaints in relation to resale price maintenance in the musical instrument sector from, in particular, customers like you and me. You know, people who just go into a shop or go online and want to buy a musical instrument, be it a flute or a guitar or a keyboard, etc., etc. And so the CMA noted that in any case, across the board, most of the complaints received by the CMA frontline team is actually in relation to resale price maintenance. But it also noticed that in particular in the musical instruments sector in the UK, it did receive an enormous amount of complaints in relation to resale price maintenance, which from now on we're going to call RPM, from customers. And so RPM is a type of anti-competitive behavior, and it's a breach of competition law by various parties via anti-competitive agreements and or concerted agreements whereby suppliers or manufacturers tend to limit the ability of retailers of a products to discount the prices of such supplied products to their customers. So if I want to say this in another way, when the suppliers and manufacturers provide their products to retailers who are then going to sell those products onto customers, either online or in brick and mortar shops, there are some agreements which are either tacit or explicit between those suppliers / manufacturers and retailers, that the retailers cannot freely discount and set the prices of these supplied products. Okay, and that is RPM, resale price maintenance, and that is a breach of competition law, because the retailers should be able to offer lower prices. Of course, they can offer higher prices, but they could also offer lower prices and definitely set their prices independently so that they can attract more customers, be it online on their websites or on brick and mortar premises. So as I was saying, the reason why the CMA went on a crusade is because it received a lot of RPM complaints in relation to musical instruments in the UK. And the way the CMA reacted is that it sent some warning letters to quite a lot of players in the musical instrument sector in the UK. So it sent a warning letter to over 80 suppliers and retailers of musical instruments suspected of having engaged in RPM, about RPM and the need to comply with competition law. So that was in 2015, 2016. And in this letter I haven't read because it's not made public, but in the other letters then it said, so then it published in an open letter to suppliers and retailers on the 21st of June 2016, which it updated on the 20th of June 2017 to provide details of the 2.7 million sterling fine that the CMA had imposed for RPM relating to domestic light fittings. So in this open letter, which I did read from 2016, updated in 2017, the CMA informed these all these suppliers and retailers from the musical instrument sector what RPM was, why it was illegal under UK competition law, and what the CMA had done in the domestic light fittings in relation to one retailer, which it fined 2.7 million pounds sterling fine, which it fined 2.7 million pounds sterling because of RPM. So after that, it published a third open letter, so a third letter, which was an open letter to all suppliers and retailers of musical instruments on the 29th of June 2020, reminding them that even though most of them had not been investigated yet for RPM, they were not off the hook, and they still had to comply with competition law and to stop cease and desist from any RPM activities, because that may attract a fine. Okay, so the CMA really used a very rational approach. It received the complaints from customers, a lot of complaints from customers in the musical instrument sector. Then it issued 3 warning letters. Among those, 2 of these warning letters were open letters, which I have read, and where I could actually see that it was really doing this sort of educational purpose and you know, informing in a very rational manner the musical instrument suppliers and retailers what was RPM, why it was illegal, what they should do, what they couldn't do, why they should definitely not do RPM, and also the risk that RPM incurred, which was to get a fine. And so sadly, these warnings did not bring the consequences that the CMA expected, which was that it wanted the musical instrument suppliers and retailers to stop doing RPM, which I think is the logical approach, right? Well, it didn't work, I'm afraid. And the CMA came to the conclusion that they just could not auto-regulate and auto-correct those musical instrument suppliers and retailers, and therefore it started in 5 investigations on the 17th of April 2018 against 5 major players. I would even say actually 6 major players in the musical instruments field in the UK. And so the second point that I wanted to touch on today was, why has the CMA decided to take such a heavy-handed approach to rectify the behavior in the musical instrument sector? Well, and also, what is the procedural history of these 5 cases? Well, as I just mentioned, the musical instruments industry proved to be completely incapable of auto-correcting and kept on practicing RPM, despite having received those 3 warning letters. So there's also, I think, a sort of cultural difference, in the sense that most of the companies that the CMA went after were actually foreign companies, be it Japanese companies, firms like Yamaha, Casio, Korg, and Roland, or US companies such as Fender. And I think that in these 2 major, really efficient, economically speaking, countries, well, the notion of competition and also freedom to set prices is perhaps not the same that one has in Europe. Okay, so yeah, so these 5 foreign companies were targeted through, of course, the UK wholly owned subsidiaries because I think culturally there was a disconnect. They just couldn't rectify their behaviors that they perhaps were free to adopt in the US and in Japan, so anywhere else in the world, but which were actually unlawful in Europe, and in particular in the UK, which at the time, by the way, was still part of the European Union as one of the 28 member states of the European Union. So, RPM, which is banned under Article 101 1 of the Treaty of it's the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, is actually the foundation under which the CMA launched those 5 investigations. And there's also the Chapter 1 of the Competition Act 1998, which is the national law regulating competition law in the UK. And so, yeah, under the Article 101 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union and Chapter 1 of the Competition Act 1998, the CMA launched those 5 investigations. And so what is quite interesting as well is that back in the early 2010s, so in particular in 2011, there was a landmark decision handed down by the European Court of Justice in relation to online sales and the fact that a supplier could not limit the ability of its retailers to do e-commerce sales and to set freely their prices online and to sell also, in this case, pharmaceutical and cosmetics products online. So this decision from the European Court of Justice was Pierre Fabre, Dermocosmétique SAS versus président de l'autorité de la concurrence et du ministre de l'économie, de l'industrie et de l'emploi. So that was handed down in October 2011, and the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, confirmed that retailers must have the ability to set freely their prices online and to do some sales of products online, even if they are part of a selective distribution network set up by the supplier, in this case, Pierre Fabre, Dermocosmétique. And this case law was confirmed again by the ECJ in its ruling Coty Germany GmbH versus Parfumerie Accente GmbH, handed down on the 6th of December 2017, in which the ECJ ruled that, again, confirmed that RPM is illegal and is a hardcore restriction of competition law, and as such is illegal, and that suppliers must let their retailers set their own prices when they sell online, and they must let their retailers sell their products online. So it's quite strange to see that even though this European case law was really quite well established back in the early 2010, as I just mentioned, here we are in 2018, in April 2018, and apparently the musical instrument suppliers and retailers didn't get the memo at all on how to go about it, about freedom of setting prices. So of course the CMA in this context, decided to have quite a heavy handed approach, because nothing seemed to be sufficiently dissuasive for these players in the musical instrument sector to comply with the law and stop doing RPM. I mean, at the end of the day, it's extremely bad for consumers, if there is a sort of cartel of retailers who just sell all the musical instruments at the same price in a free enterprise economy like the UK. This is unacceptable. So prices must be set freely. And yeah, so the five cases went, followed their course from 2018 up until the end of 2019. And then the 5 decisions were handed down between the end of 2019 and September 2020. So between the end of 2019 to December 2020. And so while the CMA was doing its investigations, it did notice several practices which were completely unacceptable, such as withholding, such as some suppliers were withholding payment of a retailer's invoice because such retailer was freely setting its own prices, or the suppliers were making financial bonuses contingent on maintaining a certain price point, or the suppliers were reducing the retailer's credit limit, or the suppliers were restricting a retailer's access to popular product ranges of musical instruments, or the suppliers were offering less favorable contractual terms to a retailer because as a retaliation because such retailer was freely setting its prices. So it really did see that there were lots of illegal RPM pricing policies which were going on in this with those 5 suppliers during the course of its investigation. So on October 2019, the CMA published its first decision against Casio, a Japanese manufacturer of digital pianos and keyboards, which it fined £3.7 million for breaching competition law by engaging in RPM. £3.7 million, pretty substantial. Then again, in March 2020, it published its second decision against Fender, a US manufacturer of guitars, which it fined £4.5 million for breaching competition law by engaging in RPM. This is the highest fine that the CMA imposed on its first degree decisions. Then again, in July, the CMA published its third decision against Korg, which is a Japanese manufacturer of synthesizers and high-tech equipment, which it fined 1.5 million again for RPM, because of RPM. And July 2020 again, it published its fourth decision against Roland, Japanese manufacturer of electronic drum kits and related components and accessories, which it fined just above £4 million for breaking competition law by engaging in RPM. And in September, finally, the last decision, the fifth decision, was issued against GAK, G-A-K, GAK, which is a UK online and brick and mortar retailer of Yamaha guitars and digital pianos. And this decision was also against Yamaha, which is a Japanese manufacturer of guitars and digital pianos. However, only GAK, the UK retailer, was fined £278,945 because Yamaha was immune from fines for blowing the whistle on the RPM arrangement to the CMA, and it also admitted liability. So it did get a total exemption of a fine. Lucky Yamaha. But both were actually found in this last and fifth decision to have breached competition law by engaging in RPM. So what's quite interesting as well is that the CMA used its own guidance as to the appropriate amount of a penalty to basically set what he called the appropriate level of those financial penalties onto these 5 players. So there are 2 criteria that the CMA uses to set this appropriate amount of penalty. First criteria being to impose penalties on infringing undertakings, which reflect the seriousness of infringement. And also the other objective is to ensure that the threat of penalties will deter both the infringing undertakings and other undertakings that may be considering anti-competitive activities from engaging in them. So there's definitely a deterrence factor in the way the CMA sets the fines. And we can see that the levels are pretty substantial. Yeah, the highest one is at 4.5 million, if I remember well, yeah, for Fender. So what are the takeaways from these 5 decisions that the CMA handed down against suppliers and manufacturers and retailers in the musical instruments sector? Well, the first is that the CMA has launched its own in-house price monitoring tool, whereby it can control in real time the various prices that are set to sell musical instruments online by those UK retailers. So it is a way of monitoring the prices and detecting suspicious activity in the musical instruments sector in particular. And that is a way also for the CMA to be able to spot that there are some agreements restricting online discounting which are going on, because with its in-house online price monitoring tool, it can definitely see and track what's going on. So this way the CMA has a better idea of which sectors to clamp down on, allowing it to prioritize enforcement in those areas, supporting to protect more customers online. So the first takeaway is, okay, this happened between 2019 and 2020, but you are not off the hook, musical instrument suppliers and retailers, because with this ongoing in-house price monitoring tool that we use, we are tracking you now and in the future. So stop RPM for now and in the future. And also the other takeaway is that the enforcement actions by the CMA were actually quite wide-ranging, because they were catching a musical instrument retailer, GAC in this case, and as well as also directors and senior staff into its net. Indeed, the musical instruments suppliers who had some senior staff and management who did not comply with a separate responsibility to be well informed on competition law themselves, and instead were involved and complicit in this illegal behavior of practicing RPM, were actually fined even more by the CMA. And so the CMA increased the fines, as it did in the Casio, Korg and Fender decisions, because the senior staff and management and the directors were complicit and actually breaching competition law themselves by doing RPM, not only the underlings. And so the fines were extremely deterrent to continuing RPM in the musical instrument sector. I mean, when you get fined around 19%, between 12 and 19% of your turnover, annual turnover, it is definitely like a tough lesson to learn. And interestingly enough, one of the infringers decided to appeal the decision, and that was, I believe, Casio. Was it Casio who appealed? I think that's quite right. Well, basically they appealed. Sorry, it was Roland actually, which appealed the infringement decision in relation to the level of its penalty, which was just above £4 million. Despite the fact that Roland had actually signed a settlement agreement offered by the CMA to settle this investigation and therefore get a discount of 20% on the fine because it had settled. Yet Roland appealed the infringement decision, and on the 19th of April 2021, the Competition Appeal Tribunal handed down its judgment, rejecting this appeal, as well as increasing the level of the fine, because it said, since you signed the settlement agreement, but you actually appealed, which basically annulled the settlement agreement, we are now going to remove a 20% discount that you received as part of the settlement, and we are hiking, therefore, the fine from just above £4 million to just above £5 million. So that was not a smart move on Roland's side, and they got even more kicked in the butt because they appealed. And I'd say that the decisions from the CMA, the 5 judgments from the CMA are in line with the policy put in place by EU regulators on fighting RPM, in particular in the musical instrument industry, but not only, also in the consumer goods industry, and so some players are targeted by RPM investigations, such as Nike and Guess, and also in the electronic sector and hardware sector, as Asus and Philips, among others, are also targeted by the European Commission on RPM practices. So, but in relation to the musical instrument sector in particular, the Germany, Sweden, and Poland have also launched some investigations of RPM in this particular sector in 2020, and in Austria decided to actually impose also some fines for RPM in the musical instrument sector. So we can see that this fight against RPM is really a European policy, which is implemented by most competition regulators in Europe. So an interesting update as well is that the 2010 EU guidelines on vertical restraints. So vertical restraints are basically all these restraints that limit competition, one of them being RPM. And so they were replaced by the 2022 EU guidelines on vertical restraints. They were published, I think, in June 2022. And again, in this updated version of the guidelines released in June 2022, RPM is described as a hardcore restriction, and the Article 4 of the regulation 2002/720, the vertical block exemption regulation. So RPM does remain a hardcore restriction, which is a breach of competition law. And this is also the view taken by the UK, which adopted a new vertical agreement blocks exemption order in June 2022 also. And in this order, in this vertical agreement block exemption order, the RPM is also described as being a hardcore restriction, and any agreement which sets out an RPM cannot be exempted under this order. So retailers and manufacturers, beware, embrace the new online El Dorado without meddling prices, or else. Thank you so much for being here, all of you guys. Thank you.